Okay, so this is the table that you use in conjunction with the tensioning guide. And what does this tell you now?
Okay, well, I think we should probably point out that this table is available for people on the website, and they should print it off. Right?
Okay.
So there's some general instructions here about resawing wood and about cutting wood of the common sizes and the tensions you want, right?
Yep.
So essentially in this table you have two things. You have your bandsaw blade widths down here. So you see a quarter, 3/8, a half, and 3/4. And then across the top of each of these columns, you have a number that comes from whatever the gauge is that you have on your saw. All right?
Okay.
So, you know, in this case, my units are 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. Okay? Don't be dismayed if your saw says 1, 2, 3, 4, or if it says, you know, a quarter, a half, or whatever, right? But there'll be some sort of a reference number on the indicator on your saw. And you want to put those across the top of the table. And then essentially what you're going to do is using the strain gauge, right, you're going to fill in each of these boxes. So you can see for my saw, with a 1/4-inch blade in the saw, when I turn the wheel and tension the blade,
Okay.
and my saw records 5
Yep.
on a 1/4-inch blade, that's 20,000 pounds.
Okay.
All right, that's too tight for that blade, but that's my smallest unit of measurement.
Okay.
But you can see on a 1/2-inch blade, right, on the same number of wheel turns, it's only 8,000, and on a 3/4-inch blade, it's only 4,000 pounds, which tells you right away that you have to do this all the way across the table for each of the different blade widths.
Okay.
Simply because there's more steel in a thicker blade.
Okay.
So why don't we show people how to set this up from the front and how to actually do the measurements with the gauge.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, so let's attach the gauge to the blade. And to do this, you attach the upper black knob and screw it down so that you've essentially captured the blade. Make sure that the lower part is also on the blade. And if you just squeeze the bottom of this lever, you can see that I can get the dial indicator here up.
Yep.
So just bring it up to the point where you're close to the 0 and tighten this up like that. And now you can rotate this to give yourself an absolute 0.
Oh, I
All
see.
right? See that?
Yeah.
You can see that right there?
Okay.
So now you're at 0, okay? So what you want to do is, as I say, for each of the different blade widths, is then apply pressure, tensioning, using your wheel or your nut or whatever it is. Usually it's a big wheel that you turn, right? Apply that until you get to the first unit of measurement, right, on your indicator on the saw. And here I come up to something that says essentially 5, all right? So here's 5 units on my saw. And if you look closely here, you'll see that that equates for this blade at 10,000 psi.
Okay.
All right? Okay.
Show me gain on where that is on your gauge on your saw.
Okay, here's the gauge on my saw here. I've turned my tensioning wheel up until 5 is centered in my indicator window here.
Okay.
You got that?
All right.
Okay. So the first unit on this saw is 5, and 5 here equates to 10,000 psi. All right?
Okay.
So I would go to my table, right, and I'd say for a 1/2-inch blade, 5 is equal to 10,000 psi, and I'd just fill it in, right? So now what I'm going to do is, remembering that 10,000 psi is probably pretty good for cutting stock, if you're cutting stock out of a plank or something like that, and the stock's between 1 and 2 inches thick, 10,000 pounds is just fine.
Yep.
Let's say you want to resaw with this blade.
Right.
What's the situation? So now I'm going to keep turning my wheel to tension my blade, and here I am. I'm at 10,000 units here. Okay, I'm at 10 units here. All right, and in my blade, on my strain gauge, I'm at 25,000
I see.
psi. Right.
I see.
So going across the table again, I'll record under the column that says 10 units for a 1/2-inch blade. Right. I'll go 25,000. And I'm going to come up one more. There's 15 on my indicator here.
Yes.
And 15 here is giving me 37,000 psi.
I see.
Okay?
Then you refer that back to the gauge, to the
Right.
paper gauge.
So I go back here and fill my table in. Now, on this blade, I'd probably go up to 20. You'll notice the numbers are getting pretty close together here, right? So there's 20 on my gauge here. And on this gauge, that equates to 46,000 psi. All right?
Okay.
So I know right away, by looking at my table, that this isn't a 1/2 inch blade, it's a 3/8 inch blade, because I can tell my numbers are different.
Okay.
All right. So, once again, to go through it, right? Start with the blade in the slack position.
Okay.
Right? Tighten up your two knobs.
Yep.
And then apply your tension. And of course, as you're applying tension, what you're doing is you're stretching the bandsaw blade. And what this gauge is measuring is it's measuring the linear distance change.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Now, to be really complicated, you can actually tension your blade to full tension, then put the gauge on here, and back yourself down, and the gauge will then round itself down the other way
Okay.
as the blade goes down. I don't really see any advantage to doing this for conventional bandsaw blades, so you're better off to start with your blade slack and run up through your range of numbers,
up the
right?
scale. Okay.
So the one other thing we should point out, I think here, is that the next step would be to take this blade off, okay,
Yeah.
and put another blade, thicker or thinner blade on,
Okay.
and run through those same numbers so that in that table you've got all those numbers filled out. And the next time you come up to your saw and you say, fine, I've got a 1-inch maple plank and I've got a 3/8 blade in here, you know, and I want to be sort of 8,000 psi, be just about fine. You can go to your table, so 8,000 psi on that blade would be a little bit less than 10 here, crank yourself up and away you go.
Okay.
And your bandsaw should perform really well. If it doesn't at that point, then your problem is either your blade's dull or you need to do some adjusting to your guides.
Okay. That's great.
That's it.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.